The morning air in Millfield carried the soft scent of wildflowers and old wood. 8-year-old Emma Wilson knelt beside the gravel road that led into the hills, her small hands trembling as she reached toward the injured German shepherd sprawled in the tall grass. The dog didn't move much, just a flick of her tail and a flicker of pain behind her brown eyes. Blood had matted the fur along one leg, and her breathing was shallow, uneven. Emma moved slowly, whispering words meant to comfort. Even though she wasn't sure the dog could hear, she tore off her jacket and draped it over the animal, shielding her from the wind. Then, with shaky fingers, Emma pulled out the tiny flip phone her mom had given her just in case and called home. Her mother, Karen Wilson, a veterinary nurse at the town's small clinic, arrived minutes later in their dusty station wagon. Together, they loaded the wounded dog into the back, Karen murmuring quick instructions while Emma cradled the dog's head in her lap, whispering softly, "You're safe now. You're okay." At the clinic, they worked quickly. The dog had a fractured hind leg, multiple scrapes, and signs of severe exhaustion. They didn't know where she had come from. No collar, no microchip. And yet, from the moment Emma laid eyes on her, she had already chosen a name. Max wasn't just a dog Emma had rescued. She was a story waiting to begin. And though Emma didn't know it yet, saving Max would change the course of her life forever. The first few days at the clinic were quiet. Max barely moved, her leg carefully splinted and her body wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lavender. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She simply watched. And Emma was always there. Emma had always loved animals. Even as a toddler, she would gently cut butterflies in her palms and talk to stray cats as if they were old friends. But lately, she had gone quiet. Only a few months earlier, Emma had lost her father after a sudden illness, an absence that left a quiet ache in everything she did. So, when she saw Max lying hurt and alone by the roadside, something shifted inside her. There was no fear, no hesitation, just a silent recognition, as if in Max's pain, she saw a mirror of her own. Emma didn't just feel sorry for Max. She loved her from the moment their eyes met. After school, Emma would head straight to the clinic instead of home. She'd sit cross-legged beside Max's crate, reading books out loud. Sometimes fairy tales, other times stories about wild animals and loyalty. She talked about her day in the quiet, gentle way children do when they know someone is listening, even if that someone can't speak back. At first, Max only blinked slowly when Emma came near. But gradually, something shifted. Her eyes began to follow Emma around the room. Her ears perked at the sound of the girl's voice. One day, when Emma dropped her book and bent to pick it up, Max gave a soft thump of her tail. Emma froze, then smiled so wide her cheeks hurt. From that day on, Max began to change. She sat up more. She tried to stand. She let Emma brush her fur, and even rested her head on the girl's lap. Emma's love had reached her, and Max was fighting to stay. "You're the reason she's healing," Karen whispered. One evening, Emma opened her eyes, stroked Max's ear through the crate, and said softly, "You're not alone anymore, and neither am I." By early spring, Max had regained most of her strength. Her limp had improved, her coat had thickened, and her eyes were no longer clouded with pain. Despite putting up flyers and checking with every nearby shelter, no one ever came forward to claim her. So, the Wilsons, without even needing to discuss it, officially welcomed Max into the family. That afternoon, Emma stood beside the exam table at the clinic while her mother ran a routine checkup on Max. Karen's hands moved carefully over the dog's abdomen. Pausing suddenly, she looked at Emma with a curious glint in her eye. "Come here, sweetheart," she said, reaching for Emma's hand and guiding it to the same spot. "Tell me if you feel something." Emma tilted her head, curious. At first, there was nothing, just a gentle rise and fall of Max's breathing. But then a tiny ripple, a soft flutter, like a heartbeat underwater. Her eyes went wide. "Is that?" Aaron smiled. "Yes, Max is going to have puppies." Emma stood still, stunned by the wonder of it. Her hand rested over the spot, and her whole face lit up with joy she hadn't felt in a long time. "Puppies," she whispered, as though the word itself was magic. That night, Emma made a bed on the floor next to Max's crate. She curled under a blanket, laying her cheek against Max's warm side. The room was quiet, but Emma's voice was steady. "I'll help you," she whispered. "I'll take care of them. I promise with all my heart." Max gave a soft sigh and shifted closer. In that moment, under soft light and steady breath, a promise passed from girl to dog, quiet, sacred, and unbreakable. The morning started like any other. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Wilson home, casting golden patterns across the hardwood floor. Emma sat at the kitchen table, lazily swirling her spoon in a bowl of cereal, listening to the quiet hum of her mother preparing for the day. Max lay near the window, her swollen belly rising and falling in a slow, rhythmic motion. Everything felt peaceful, predictable, safe. Then came the sound, a sudden, dull thud from the living room, followed by a sharp, broken whimper. Emma's spoon clattered to the floor as she jumped up. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Karen was already moving, a tightness on her face Emma hadn't seen before. "Max!" Emma shouted, running after her mother. They found her collapsed on the floor, her breathing ragged, her body trembling. One of her hind legs kicked out weakly before going still. Karen dropped to her knees, already checking Max's pulse, her eyes scanning for signs that something, anything, was still stable. "Emma, get the emergency kit." "Now," she said, her voice steady but tense. Emma froze for a heartbeat, staring at Max's glassy eyes, then turned and sprinted down the hallway. Her fingers fumbled at the latch of the kit as she called out for help, voice breaking. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Blankets, gentle hands, the roar of the car engine. Emma sat in the back seat, cradling Max's head in her lap as they sped toward the clinic. "Stay with me," she whispered over and over, brushing the fur back from Max's face. "You have to stay." But deep inside, somewhere beneath the hope, fear had begun to root. She could see it in her mother's hands, shaking just slightly. She could feel it in the way Max's breathing faltered, slowed. And though Emma didn't want to believe it, didn't dare, a small voice inside her whispered the words she couldn't bear to hear. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and fear. Emma stood trembling in the hallway, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. Through the glass doors, she caught a glimpse of Max, limp, motionless, being rushed into the emergency room. The doors swung shut with a final thud that made her flinch. Heron disappeared behind them, joining the team of veterinary staff as they worked urgently. Machines beeped. Voices called out clipped instructions. Emma could just make out her mother's figure, her movements practiced but desperate. Everything felt distant, like watching someone else's nightmare. Emma pressed her forehead to the cold window, searching for Max in the chaos. Her breath fogged the glass, and her tears smeared across it. But she didn't move. She barely noticed when a nurse tried to guide her to a chair. She didn't hear the words of comfort being offered. All she could do was hope. Hope beyond reason. Hope beyond anything real. Then the door opened. Erin stepped out first, her face pale and wet with silent tears. Behind her, a man Emma hadn't seen in years followed. Dr. Alan Myers, the clinic's senior vet, who had come in on emergency call. Emma looked up, her eyes wild with questions. She didn't need them to say it. She could see it in their faces. Karen knelt beside her. "Emma, sweetheart." Emma shook her head. "No," she whispered. "No. She was okay. She was going to be okay. I'm so sorry." Karen choked. Max didn't make it. The world cracked. Emma dropped to her knees, sobbing into her mother's arms. Her body shook with grief, too heavy for words. Max. Her Max was gone. But then, something strange. A movement behind Karen. Dr. Myers cradled a small towel-wrapped bundle in his arms. He knelt down gently. "We managed to deliver one puppy," he said softly. "But there's no heartbeat. We tried everything." Emma blinked through her tears. Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. Can I hold him?" Karen hesitated, then gave a small nod. Dr. Myers carefully placed a tiny form into Emma's waiting hands. The puppy was impossibly small. His fur was slick and damp, his limbs motionless, his chest still. He felt more like memory than life. Emma sat slowly on the cold tile floor, curling around the puppy. She pressed him gently to her chest and began rubbing him through the towel, soft, steady strokes, trying to warm a body that wouldn't respond. "I promised her," she whispered. "I promised I'd take care of them." Minutes passed. Nothing changed. Emma didn't stop. She rubbed harder, whispered louder. "Please, please come back." Still nothing. Her arms dropped slightly. Her hands stilled. Her voice, broken and tired, fell into silence. "I tried," she whispered, barely audible. "I really tried." And then something inside her gave way. Emma pulled the puppy close and clutched him tightly against her chest. A sob burst out from her, and she began to cry, deep, aching sobs that shook her small frame. A single tear slid down her cheek, fell onto the puppy's fur, and slowly traced the curve of his tiny, unmoving face. Then a flicker, so faint she nearly missed it. Emma's breath caught. Her eyes widened. Another twitch. Then a weak, wet squeak. Dr. Myers rushed forward. Karen gasped. The vet techs moved instantly, but Emma sat still, staring in wonder as life returned to a fragile body she had nearly surrendered. Tears poured down her cheeks, but this time they were filled with hope. "You came back," she whispered. She leaned in, pressed her lips gently to his damp head. "Your name is Charlie." The hours that followed felt like a fragile dream, one where every sound, every flicker of movement carried the weight of hope. Charlie was rushed into the clinic's neonatal unit, a small, temperature-controlled space usually reserved for the most vulnerable patients. He was placed inside a glass incubator, no bigger than a laundry basket. Tubes and wires monitored every breath, every heartbeat. A tiny heating pad cradled his body, and soft light bathed him in warmth. Karen explained everything in a low, steady voice. "His temperature has to stay constant. He needs round-the-clock feeding and respiratory support. Even with all that, survival isn't guaranteed." Emma listened without blinking. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry. She simply nodded. From that moment, she was by Charlie's side every second she was allowed to be. After school, she'd rush to the clinic, pull a chair up beside the incubator, and press her hands to the glass. She spoke in a whisper, soft, steady, and full of something fierce. "You're doing great," she told him. "Just keep breathing. I'm here." Sometimes she read aloud stories of brave heroes and lost animals who always found their way home. Other times, she just watched, her breath matching his tiny, fluttering chest. At night, while her mother handled the 2-hour feedings, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling and whispering silent prayers into the dark. Slowly, agonizingly, Charlie began to change. His heartbeat grew stronger. His legs kicked just a little harder. The deep blue tint around his nose and paws began to fade. One evening, Emma arrived to find him sitting up, barely, shakily, inside the incubator. When he spotted her, his eyes opened wider and the tip of his tail thumped once against the soft blanket. Emma laughed through her tears. Charlie was breathing, and this time he wasn't fighting alone. As the days turned into weeks, Charlie's fight for life became a quiet miracle unfolding before Emma's eyes. No longer confined to the incubator, Charlie was moved to a cozy corner of the clinic, an enclosure filled with soft blankets, low walls, and the comforting scent of Emma's sweatshirt. He still needed around-the-clock care, but he was stronger now, more aware. Every day, Emma sat cross-legged beside him, her presence calm and steady. She spoke to him constantly, sometimes telling him about her day, sometimes simply repeating, "You're safe, you're loved." Charlie responded to her in ways that left the entire staff in awe. He would lift his tiny head the moment she entered the room, his eyes following her every move. When she reached into his enclosure, he scooted closer, pressing against her palm. The tip of his tail wagged in quiet joy. Heron noticed too. One afternoon, she watched as Emma helped Charlie take a few wobbly steps toward her. "I've never seen anything like this," she whispered. "He knows you, Emma. You're his person." And Emma knew it too. In the quiet hours they spent together, a new bond was forming. Not just of survival, but of purpose. Charlie wasn't just a puppy. He was Max's legacy. He was Emma's second chance to keep her promise. Each feeding, each small step, each nuzzle against her hand was proof that love, real love, could rebuild what had once felt broken. One evening, after another gentle session of physical therapy, Charlie curled up beside Emma and fell asleep with his head tucked beneath her arm. She looked down at him, her hand resting over his heartbeat. "I've got you," she whispered. "We've got each other." And for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel like she was healing alone. Day by day, fear loosened its grip. Emma began to notice the small joys, how Charlie's tail wagged at her voice, how his tiny bark grew stronger each day. The ache of losing Max was still there, but now it came with warmth. She was no longer just saving him. They were growing together. In the quiet rhythm of their days, something began to shift, not suddenly, but slowly, like morning light creeping into a dark room. Emma no longer held her breath every time Charlie stirred. His movements grew steadier, his eyes brighter, and with each tiny victory, his first bark, his first clumsy chase after a toy, Emma felt a piece of herself begin to heal. They were no longer just surviving. They were learning how to live again. As Charlie grew, so did Emma. The clumsy little puppy who once fit in the palm of her hand was now bounding across the clinic floor, ears too big for his head, paws always a step ahead of his balance. He was full of energy, full of life, and always full of love for Emma. She trained him patiently, celebrated every small milestone, and kept a picture of Max by Charlie's bed. Sometimes, when Charlie curled up beside her, Emma could almost feel Max's spirit there, too, watching, proud, at peace. One afternoon, as Emma brushed Charlie's now thick, healthy coat, she looked up at her mother and said softly, "I want to be a vet someday like you." Heron turned to her with wide eyes, then knelt beside her daughter. "You already have the most important part," she said, brushing Emma's hair behind her ear. "A heart that never give up." Emma smiled, the words settling deep inside her. The pain of losing Max was still there, but it no longer held her back because Charlie was here. And with every breath he took, Emma remembered what she had promised, not just to Max, but to herself. And that quiet promise was already shaping the life Emma would grow into, one filled with care, courage, and purpose.